We may think we are protected because you're pretty good shot at the range. That might not matter at all when you are actually presented with a confrontation, as my next guest, James Barnhart, says. He's a former contract bodyguard and small arms tactics instructor for businesses and families. He has actual gunfight experience, which he will tell us about, lectures on the psychological and physiological aspects of training for armed confrontation. If you have a gun, you need to know what he has to say. Welcome back to the Dr. Gina Show, one of our favorites, James Barnhart.
Dr. Gina, thank you so much for having me back. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you. Now, first I want you to tell us about your experience and what led you to be so passionate about the issue of confronting these psychological and physiological aspects during confrontation.
My story started in 1995. I lived in Norfolk, Virginia, and I had just been discharged from the Navy, and I was starting a career in fugitive recovery and executive protection. And as it just so happened, I returned from the grocery store one day, and I was armed because I always went armed because I never knew what kind of a confrontation who I was going to run into. But these two individuals decided that they were going to try to rob me in my driveway. And when I stepped out of my truck, they began firing at me. And so I had to engage them both. And the entire interaction took about 15 seconds, but in 15 seconds, they got off 3 shots, and I got off 15 shots, and hitting the driver 7 times and the passenger 3 times. And that really opened my eyes. I'd had some introductory training. I'd had military training. I was involved in law enforcement on the base, and I also had training from my mentor, Russ Carmine, who got me into the fugitive recovery and the executive protection. So I had a framework, but what I realized that night was the physiological aspects of this encounter was very different than when we were kicking in house doors on a crack house or something like that, because we were caught by surprise. And so there wasn't that buildup. There wasn't that psychological preparation. It was on in a matter of milliseconds, and it was over in a matter of seconds. And that started me down the path of really exploring the psychological aspects of armed self-defense training.
So what happens physiologically to someone when they are faced with a really unforeseen confrontation and they are armed?
It's situational dependent on how much time you have leading up, or your cognition of what is getting ready to take place. If it's instantaneous, you totally go from a part of the brain called the amygdala, which I've talked about before, and it's a fight or flight response. If you have nothing in your repertoire, chances are you're going to hesitate, sometimes up to several seconds, and you could hesitate long enough that you actually seem to freeze in place, and you're at the mercy of the attacker. Now, if you have something in your repertoire where you've trained, that amygdala is going to pull that out, and instead of a flinch or a freeze reaction, you can instantly, well, if you've practiced for it, if you've trained for it, you can initiate a counterattack much more quickly and much more efficiency, with much more efficiency. And this is paramount because until you do that, you are reacting to your attacker, and they are in control, and you're always a step behind. So once you can force them into reacting to you, then you can start gaining on them, and you can start outpacing their decision-making process, which is called the OODA loop. And that puts you in better control, or at least disrupts their thought process and their plans long enough that will cause them to miss because of accuracy issues, and give you that little bit of time you need to engage them or to seek an egress route to get out of the situation.
So, because we all hear the stories, though, about, some little 12-year-old girl, and burglars are coming in her house, and she uses her pink gun to stop them. So some people obviously have this fight or flight, the fight, in their repertoire, as you're saying, and they haven't trained for it. But tell us about the cases you're talking about, where people who have trained extensively still opt for that flight option when confronted. I think you told me once there was police that this happens to quite often. It shocked me.
Yeah, it depends on the training program. You can have what's called training scars introduced into somebody's psychological response based on the training, how their training is set up. because you're going to react in reality exactly how you train, because that's what your amygdala pulls up. That's what you revert to. So there's cases of police officers who on the range officer would have them draw, fire 2 shots, and reholster. And then when confronted in an actual scenario, they would draw, fire, and reholster. Well, anyone who's been in actual gunfights know that 2 shots sometimes may not be enough. You may not even hit the attacker with 2 shots. They can continue on for sometimes several minutes before they go into shock from blood loss or whatever, and they're fully functional. So the training has to be based on reality. It has to be based on psychological facts and physiological facts. Feel-good training, or the approach of you're going to scare them by firing warning shots like our vice president suggested, is simply not based in fact, and it's not based in actual experience. People tend to want to create their own idea of how these things go down, and when you look back at history, especially if you look at the older, the ancient, like the Roman armies, as long as their attack wasn't disrupted, as long as they were the aggressor and the opposing army was reacting to their actions, they could cut the opposing army down fairly easily. And it's the same thing when you have an active shooter, whether they're engaging one person or they're engaging multiple people. If you cannot cause them to start to react to you, if they maintain control and they are the aggressor with control of the scenario, they have a much better advantage. And if you're not training to cause that to happen, then you're simply training to produce a weapon, and that may not be enough if you don't know how to actually fight with that weapon. You have to be able to move. You have to be able to change the plane of the shooting field. If you're standing and they're coming at you, you may need to sidestep. You may need to go to a kneeling position simply to cause them to have to react and change their aim. That might be the split second you need to get the advantage and put them down.
Dr. Pete Blair studied this, Director of Research for University's Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Center. And there's an article about it, Blaze, and it said that about 1/3 of the time an armed citizen can really make all the difference, because essentially, I think you said on my show originally to me, police are really cleanup crews. I think we like to think the police are going to come in the midst of an attack, but it doesn't happen very often. One of the most striking parts of the research findings came when Dr. Blair and his associates studied survival rates at Virginia Tech. And interestingly, of course, this is an anniversary of that horrible situation. But while in 2 classrooms, students and teachers tried to hide or play dead after the killers entered the room, most of the individuals were ultimately killed by hiding or playing dead. So that doesn't always work. And warning shots, as you said, as Obama suggested, don't always work. How do you know, though, what works in what situation? Are there simple cues that you can have in your head that you can memorize that'll say, this is what I'm going to do if I'm confronted?
Well, it's situational dependent for sure. And a good quote I like to use from the founder of SEAL Team 6, Richard Marcinko, is any action is better than inaction, and sometimes not acting is the boldest action of all. That has various meanings. But if you're in an active shooter situation, certainly if you're just going to hide or play dead, you're not doing anything to change their approach. You're not doing anything to change their plan.
So, wait, let's back up, because I really want to get this for listeners. So if the person is actively engaged in shooting, hiding or playing dead is probably not your answer, because they've already demonstrated that they have the gun, are willing to use it, and are using it.
Yeah, they've already committed, and all you're doing is providing a stationary target. That's all you're doing. Or you're playing hide and seek, and then it becomes a challenge. It becomes more fun for them to track you down and then shoot you. The only way that you can really make an effective difference in this situation is if you put them on the defensive. If you cause their awareness of their own immortality to become a factor in their decision making. If they become self-aware that they are now in a survival situation, you're going to cause confusion, you're going to cause their thought process, you're totally going to cause their plans to go out the window, because they planned on coming in and dominating like they were walking through a video game and shooting people at will. But now the video game has come alive, come into their living room, and has put a cold, hard fact in front of them that, hey, if you continue, you're probably going to die right now. That is what it takes. Richard Wrangham wrote in his book Demonic Males, when studying the great apes, that even the chimps, when they would go on raiding parties against opposing clans, if they were numerically inferior, or if they felt like they were in a situation that was not going to be something that they could survive or come out of unscathed, even the apes would back off because they realized this is a bad situation. We may not survive this. And that's documented well throughout the species. And any time that, unless you're dealing with an out-and-out sociopath, if you can make that person believe that they are now getting ready to become dead, that is a huge psychological impact on their actions, and you're going to cause them to hesitate. Anything you can do to stop their plan of action, anything you can do to stop the violence of action, is going to give you the chance to make them react to you, and that gives you the upper hand. Whether it's throwing desks, whether it's throwing chairs, whether it's running down the hallway as fast as you can, or everybody coming at them at once, anything that can disrupt their plan of action is going to be beneficial. Now, if you're armed, all the more better, because now you can cause them to not be able to regain their ability to attack. You can confuse them, stop them, disrupt them, and then you can fire on them and cause them to be incapacitated and not be able to carry out a further attack.
Okay, so ultimately, you're saying that for those who do wish to carry guns, they need specialized training to get it through to their amygdala part of their brain that they need to fight and how to fight, or they could lose a fight and get themselves killed, or worse, get themselves and everyone they're trying to defend killed. But not everybody lives in the same town as you, where I know you do this training. Where can people find these sorts of training courses? And just let us know what is the best way that people can go find these training courses and get familiar with this, because we're not talking about target practice here, and I think that's really important to point out.
Yeah, it's about movement, and it's about learning how to move with a weapon, learning how to move with a handgun or a rifle or a shotgun, depending on your situation. Movement is the key. You can do more with movement to disrupt the attacker than anything else, because that forces them to have to change aim, have to change direction, and it messes up their plans. I'm involved with a group called Pulse O2DA, or PulseFirearmsTraining.com, and we offer that kind of training. We offer it to businesses, large churches. We offer it to school administrators of private schools who choose to train their faculty and staff. There are several other good instructors all around the country that you can go to that offer this kind of training. You can also join groups such as USPSA, United States Practical Shooting Association, or IDPA, International Defensive Pistol Association. Now, these don't necessarily teach you to gunfight, but what they do is get you comfortable with moving and shooting at the same time. And you have to couple that with good gunfight training, not just moving training where you're engaging targets, but actual gunfight training. NRA courses, there's some good courses. Your basic CCW or your basic pistol course is not going to get you into this. You have to seek the advanced training with the advanced instructors, preferably somebody who's got actual gunfight experience. Now, this is going to cost you a little bit more, but it's just like with motorcycle helmets. If you've got a $10 head, you only buy a $10 helmet. But if you want to really protect yourself, you're going to spend a few $100s for a quality helmet that's going to give you protection. The same applies to firearms training when it comes to gunfight training. Not basic firearm safety and basic accuracy skills, but actual gunfight training is what you got to seek out.
All right, and where can folks find you?
I'm on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at defcon_pulse, and you can email me at jbarnhart72@gmail.com, and you can also contact us through pulsefirearmstraining.com.
pulsefirearmstraining.com. James Barnhart, we just appreciate not just you being on the show and telling us about this, but what you do in your everyday life. It is so important, and God only knows how many lives will ultimately be saved from the work that you do every day. Thank you so much for being on the show and for all you do.
Dr. Gina, thank you as well. It's been a pleasure.
All right, my friend.